They buried my drainage canal with 8 tons of crushed stone, and for about 6 hours, I honestly thought I was the one getting buried. By the end of the third day, though, their pristine, multi-million-dollar golf course looked like something you'd need hip waders to walk through. And suddenly, everyone wanted to have a very polite conversation. Funny how fast respect shows up once the water does. My name's Daniel Harper. Most folks just call me Dan. And I run a small metal fabrication shop tucked into the back corner of a gated community down in coastal Florida. The kind of place where every house has a clay tile roof, a 3-car garage, and a view that costs more than most people's entire lives. White stucco everywhere, palm trees lined up like they're on payroll, and more Teslas than pickup trucks, except mine. Mine's a 20-year-old Ford with a welding rig bolted to the back and a coffee stain older than some of the residents. Now, my shop doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic. I'll admit that corrugated siding, the smell of hot aluminum and diesel, sparks flying if you walk by at the wrong time. But it's been there longer than every single mansion in that neighborhood. My father built it back in the early 70s when that land was mostly mangroves and dirt roads, and I grew up sweeping those floors, learning how to weld before I could legally drive, fixing hulls for fishermen who paid in cash, and sometimes beer. And right next to my shop, maybe 20 feet off the back fence, sits a concrete pump station. Ugly thing. Loud. Functional. Absolutely essential. That pump moves water out of the entire development. All the drainage, all the runoff, all the tide pressure when the ocean decides to remind you who's really in charge. Without it, that whole neighborhood floods. Not slowly, not politely. I'm talking hours. Now enter our problem. Not water, not yet, but a man named Richard Halstead. Richard was the HOA president, real estate attorney, always dressed like he was 5 minutes away from closing a deal or ruining someone's day, drove a black Range Rover that never had a speck of dirt on it, not even after a storm. He had this way of talking where he never raised his voice, but somehow still made you feel like you were already in the wrong before you even opened your mouth. He didn't like my shop. Never said it outright at first, but you could feel it. Little things. Complaints about industrial noise, comments about property values, suggestions that maybe I'd consider relocating. You know, polite pressure dressed up as community concern. And I kept telling him the same thing, over and over. I'm not leasing. I'm not renting. I own this land. End of conversation, at least in my mind. But Richard, he wasn't the kind of guy who dropped things. He just waited. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I got there early, sun barely up, humidity already doing its thing. Unlocked the shop, poured myself some burnt coffee, and was about to fire up the MIG welder when I heard the rumble of a dump truck behind the property. Not unusual by itself. Landscaping crews were always moving around in that neighborhood, trying to make nature look expensive. But then I heard a second truck, then a third. I walked around back, wiping my hands on a rag, and that's when I saw them, 3 guys in safety vests. One of them I recognized, Miguel Torres, ran a landscaping crew that worked almost exclusively for the HOA. Good guy, never had an issue with him. But what they were doing, that stopped me cold. They were dumping crushed limestone straight into my drainage canal. Now, this canal wasn't decorative. It wasn't some little ditch. It was a functional runoff channel that connected directly to the pump station. Water moved through there constantly, especially during high tide. And they were just filling it in. I walked right up to Miguel, probably faster than I should have, and said, "Hey, what the hell is this?" He looked uncomfortable immediately, wouldn't meet my eyes at first, then shrugged a little and said, "Orders from the association, Dan. They're cleaning it up, making it look nicer. By burying it." He gave me that half-smile people use when they know they're in the middle of something they don't control. "I just do the work, man. No permit?" I asked. "No notice? No conversation?" He shook his head, then added quietly, "You might want to talk to Halstead." Yeah, I figured. By noon, they'd dumped what had to be several tons of stone. The canal was basically gone, turned into this pale, compacted strip like it had never carried water a day in its life. And right about the time they were packing up, the tide started coming in. At first, it was subtle, just a slower flow, then a backup, then that unmistakable gurgling sound from the drains inside my shop, the kind that makes your stomach drop because you know exactly what's about to happen. Salt water started pushing up through the floor grates. Not pouring, not yet, but enough. Enough to hit the extension cords. enough to make me kill power to half the shop in a panic. I tried to move what I could, dragged a couple toolboxes on a higher shelves, but water doesn't wait for you to get organized. Within an hour, I had a thin layer across the entire floor, brackish, murky, carrying that sharp, metallic smell of salt and decay. My welder sparked once, twice, then died. Plasma cutter followed. A couple of smaller tools just gave up without ceremony. I stood there in ankle-deep water, looking at 40 years of work, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I felt quiet, because something about this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt planned. That evening, after I pumped out what I could and shut everything down, I went home, dug through an old metal filing cabinet in my garage, and pulled out the original property deed my father kept. Yellowed paper, edges worn, notes scribbled in his handwriting. And that's where things got interesting. Because according to that deed, the pump station behind my shop, it wasn't theirs. It was mine. And the only reason it was sitting there, running, draining their entire neighborhood, was because of a month-to-month access agreement signed decades ago, something that had just quietly rolled over, year after year, while the community grew around it. I read that line 3 times, then I sat back in that old folding chair and just stared at the page. 200 homes, a golf course, roads, utilities, everything, all relying on a system sitting on land they didn't actually control. And for the first time since the water started rising, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, at least that's what I told myself, but because I finally understood the game they thought they were playing. And more importantly, the part they forgot I owned. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, not in the way people expect. It was quieter than that, more focused, like when you're lining up a weld and you know one wrong move is going to ruin the whole seam. I kept replaying the day in my head, the trucks, the stone, Miguel not looking me in the eye, Halstead nowhere to be seen, and that canal, filled in like it never mattered. But it did matter. It mattered because that wasn't landscaping, that was leverage, or at least they thought it was. By sunrise, I had coffee in one hand and that deed in the other, sitting at the same old workbench my dad used to lean on. I could almost hear him, the way he used to talk when someone tried to outsmart him on a job. Don't swing first. Danny, just make sure when you do, it counts. He wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a polished man, but he understood something a lot of people don't. If you're right, you don't need to rush. So I didn't. First thing I did was call a guy named Leonard Briggs, retired surveyor, used to do boundary work all over the county, knew more about old land records than anyone I'd ever met. He picked up on the third ring, voice scratchy like gravel. I told him what I found, read him the clause about the pump station, the access agreement, the monthly lease. He went quiet for a second, then said, "You still got that document in your hand?" "Yeah." "Good, don't lose it. And don't let anyone tell you that's outdated. That kind of agreement doesn't expire unless someone ends it. So it's valid?" "It's stronger than valid," he said, almost amused. "It's inconvenient for them." That word stuck with me. Inconvenient. Because that's exactly what I'd been to Halstead this whole time. An inconvenience, something that didn't fit his clean little vision of the neighborhood, something he could eventually push out, smooth over, erase. Well, inconvenience works both ways. By mid-morning, I was at the post office, sending a certified letter addressed to the HOA. Attention, Richard Halstead. Short, clean, no emotion in it, just facts. I was terminating the access agreement for the pump station, effective immediately, as permitted under the terms of the lease. No threats, no demands, not yet. Just a door closing. I remember the woman behind the counter asking, "Important?" I said, "It's about to be." Back at the shop, the water hadn't fully drained from the night before, just sitting there in shallow pools, reflecting the light coming through the open bay door. You could smell it before you even stepped inside, that mix of salt and something rotting underneath, not strong yet, but getting there. I stood by the control panel for the pump station for a long minute, hand resting on the metal casing, feeling the vibration of the system doing its job, pushing water out, keeping everything dry, keeping their lives comfortable. And I thought about walking away. I really did. Because once you flip a switch like that, you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. It's not just a move, it's a statement. But then I looked at the canal, or what used to be one, buried under that pale stone like a scar, and I thought about standing in that water the day before, watching my tools die one by one. And I made a decision. I shut the pump off. No drama, no speech, just a quiet click, and then silence, except for the faint sound of water shifting somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. At first, nothing obvious happened. That's the thing about systems like that. They don't fail all at once. It starts small, subtle, easy to ignore if you're not paying attention. But by mid-afternoon, people started noticing. I got a call from Mike Alvarez, the grounds superintendent good guy, always treated me fair. His voice had that tight edge to it. Dan, you messing with the pump? I didn't answer right away, just let the question hang for a second, then said, systems offline. Offline? He repeated, like he didn't like how that sounded. We got water backing up on the 7th fairway. Drains aren't pulling. Might want to check your drainage, I said. He exhaled slow. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. He hung up after that. By evening, you could see it if you drove past the course, patches of standing water where there shouldn't be any, the kind that reflect the sky just enough to look wrong. The hazards were swelling, edges bleeding out into the grass, turning that perfect green into something softer, unstable. Day 1 wasn't chaos, but it was the beginning of it. Day 2, that's when it turned. I came in early again, same as always, and before I even opened the shop door, I could hear it mosquitoes. Not a few clouds of them. That low, constant whine that tells you water's been sitting too long. Inside the neighborhood, things were getting uncomfortable. The ponds on the course had gone from clear to cloudy, then to that thick yellow-green film that clings to the surface like it's alive. You could smell it now from a distance, not just salt, but something sour, something that didn't belong in a place where people paid 6 figures for a view. I saw Jennifer Cole, the tennis coach, walking past the main clubhouse when I drove through later that morning. She had a towel over her shoulder, and this look on her face like she'd just stepped into the wrong timeline. She flagged me down, which she'd never done before. Dan, do you know what's going on with the water? She asked. I shrugged, kept it simple. Drainage issue. It smells, she said, almost offended by it. Like a swamp. I nodded a little. That's because it is one now. She blinked at me, trying to decide if I was joking, then just shook her head and walked off. By midday, the HOA was scrambling. You could feel it in the way trucks were moving, people talking in tight circles, phones glued to ears. But here's the thing, you can't fix a system you don't understand, and they'd spent years ignoring the one person who actually did. Around 3 in the afternoon, I saw Halstead for the first time since all this started. He pulled up outside my shop, stepped out of that spotless Range Rover like he was stepping onto a courtroom floor, composed, controlled, but there was something different in his eyes. Not panic, not yet, but awareness. He walked up slow, looked past me into the shop, at the water stains, the equipment sitting silent, then back at me. We need to talk, he said. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, not inviting him in. We are talking. He glanced toward the canal, or what used to be it, then back at me. You've created a problem. I let that sit for a second, then said, no. I stopped solving one. That hit him, not visibly, not in a big way, but I saw the shift. You shut down a critical system without notice, he said, voice tightening just a bit. That exposes you to serious liability. I almost smiled at that, almost. I sent notice, I said. Certified. You'll get it. Or maybe you already have. He didn't respond right away, just studied me, like he was recalculating something. This doesn't end well for you, he said finally. I tilted my head a little. Depends who you ask. There was a moment there, just a few seconds, where neither of us moved, and you could hear the faint buzz of insects, the distant slosh of water where it shouldn't be, the whole neighborhood starting to feel the weight of something they didn't plan for. Then he turned, got back in his car, and drove off without another word. Day 2 ended with the smell getting worse, the water spreading further, and the first signs of something bigger starting to crack. Because day 3 was when it stopped being an inconvenience and started becoming a crisis. Day 3 didn't ease in, it hit all at once, like the system finally decided it had taken enough and was done pretending everything was fine. I got a call before I even left the house, around 6 in the morning, Mike again. But this time he didn't sound frustrated, he sounded tired, like something had already gone wrong and he was just reporting it. Ground floor units on the east side are taking water. It's coming in through the doors. Dan, brown water. I didn't say much, just told him I understood, and hung up. Not because I didn't care, but because at that point, there wasn't anything left to explain. The chain reaction had already started. By the time I drove into the neighborhood, you could smell it before you saw it, thick, sour, almost chemical mixed with rot, like something old had been dragged up from underneath and left in the sun. The streets had that sheen to them, not flooded exactly, but damp in a way that didn't belong. Puddles forming where there shouldn't be any, grass darkening, sidewalks slick. And then you hit the low-lying row of condos on the east side, and that's where it got real. People were outside in slippers, in robes, dragging things out onto higher ground rugs, chairs, boxes, one older guy just standing there barefoot in ankle-deep water inside his own living room, like he hadn't quite caught up to what was happening yet. The water itself wasn't clear, it was that murky brown, the kind that carries everything with it: salt, dirt, whatever it finds along the way, and it had pushed right through their French doors like it owned the place. Nobody said anything to me as I drove past, but they looked. And you could tell, they knew something bigger was behind this, they just didn't know what yet. By mid-morning, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Not the usual kind where people argue about parking spaces or paint colors. This was different. You could feel it in the way the parking lot filled up, in the silence when people walked in the way conversations stayed low and tight, like nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. I didn't rush over. I finished my coffee, took my time, then grabbed a folder I'd put together the night before. Inside it, everything. Photos of the canal before and after, invoices for the equipment I lost, estimates for repairs, documentation of the lease, clean, organized, undeniable. When I finally walked into that clubhouse, every head turned, not dramatically, not like in a movie, but enough. Enough that you could feel the shift. I spotted Halstead at the front of the room, standing next to a woman I hadn't seen before, sharp suit, composed posture, lawyer, no question. She had a tablet in her hand and a look on her face like she already knew how this was going to end. She just wasn't happy about it. Halstead, on the other hand, he looked different. Still put together, still controlled, but the edges were showing. He was wearing rubber boots, expensive ones, probably, but still boots. That told you everything. He saw me, paused whatever he was saying, and motioned for me to come up. No pleasantries this time, no careful wording. "You need to fix this," he said, straight out. I didn't stop walking until I was right in front of him, close enough that he had to tilt his head just slightly. Then I handed him the folder. "That's what it costs," I said. He opened it, flipped through the pages. I watched his eyes move, faster with each line. Numbers stacking up, reality settling in. Equipment damage, $22,000. Lost contracts, $31,000. Estimated relocation of the pump station if they chose to move it, $180,000. And then the lease terms, new agreement, long-term, prepaid. He looked up at me, jaw tight. "This is absurd." I shook my head once. "No, this is math." "That's extortion," he snapped, loud enough now that people in the room shifted. I leaned in just a fraction, not aggressive, not threatening, just enough to make sure he heard me clearly. "No, Richard, extortion is when you threaten something you don't have the right to do. I turned off a system sitting on my land after giving notice because your crew buried the drainage that kept my business alive." There was a murmur behind us, quiet, but growing. He turned to the lawyer beside him. "Say something." She didn't answer right away, just kept looking at the documents, then at me, then back at him. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried. "He's within his rights." That landed heavier than anything I could have said. Halstead blinked once, like he was buying time, then straightened up, trying to pull control back into the room. "We can move the pump." I nodded slowly. "You can try." The lawyer exhaled softly, not quite a sigh, more like resignation. "Permitting alone will take months, environmental review, engineering plans, and that's if everything goes smoothly. And in the meantime," I added, glancing around the room, at the people now very aware of what was at stake. "Water keeps rising." Silence. Real silence this time, the kind that forces decisions. He closed the folder, held it there for a second, then looked at me again, and whatever fight he had left, it shifted. Not gone, but redirected. "What exactly are you asking for?" he said, quieter now. I didn't rush the answer. "Full compensation for the damage. New lease, 15 years, prepaid terms for the first 3. And from this point forward, any work within 200 feet of my property goes through me first. No exceptions." A couple people in the room exchanged looks, not because it was outrageous, but because it wasn't. It was controlled, specific, final. Halstead let out a slow breath, then nodded once to the lawyer. She gave a small, almost invisible nod back. Draft it, he said. 4 days later, the check cleared. They rebuilt the canal, properly this time. Not rushed, not beautified, engineered. Sloped correctly, reinforced, exactly the way it should have been from the start. They signed every page of that agreement, every clause, every restriction, and for the first time since I'd known him, Halstead shook my hand without trying to control the grip. Didn't say thank you, didn't apologize, but he understood. The morning I turned the pump back on, I stood there for a second, same spot as before, hand on the panel, and flipped the switch. The system came alive with that low, steady hum, water moving again, pressure equalizing. And over the next few hours, you could watch the neighborhood breathe out. Puddles shrinking, grass drying. That smell slowly fading like it had never been there, at least on the surface. By the weekend, boats were back at the docks, people out on their patios, drinks in hand, like the whole thing had just been a bad few days. Except it hadn't. Because now, every year, they pay me more than most people's salaries, not to fix anything, not to build anything, just to keep doing what I was already doing. And to remember that I'm here. So here's the part one keep thinking about. The part one still don't have a clean answer for. Was I protecting what was mine? Or did I go too far once I realized I could? Because yeah, I followed the law. But if you were living in one of those flooded units that morning, watching water come through your door, you probably wouldn't care whose land the pump was on. So I'm curious what you think. Was it fair, or was it revenge dressed up as legality? Let me know in the comments, because I've heard both sides, and I'm still not sure which one sits right.